Hi everyone, Coldon here with another VOX Immortalis commentary guide. This video is for the Twilight Ascendant Council, and this shows the normal 10-man version. I've slowed this video down to about 40% normal speed, and even then, it's not slow enough to explain everything, so I have to speak really quickly. This is a 5-mob encounter. You start with 2 council members, Falutius and Ignatius. Each need a normal tank. And they have varying counter abilities. So Falutius is water-based, Ignatius, as you can guess, is fire-based. So Falutius' abilities are Hydro Lance, which you just saw there he cast. It's interruptible and it targets a random raid member, and it does 80 or 90,000. So your main tank on Falutius should interrupt as many as he can, or she. The other ability you see there is Water Bomb. This is a random AE. As you can see, it drops bombs in random locations around the room. They don't actually target players per se. It just can hit you. But when it does hit you, you will gain a debuff called Waterlogged. If you have Waterlogged, you're snared 50%, but more importantly, if you have the debuff and Falutius casts his final ability called Glaciate, the AE from Glaciate will interact with Waterlogged and turn you into an ice block. You'll take severe damage over time and possibly kill yourself. So there's Glaciate. So when you get waterlogged, you need to step into that trail of fire left by Ignatius, and that will get rid of the debuff. And you have about 10 seconds after waterlogged lands before Glaciate is cast usually, so make sure you do that. Lastly, Glaciate does AE damage to the whole raid, and it does more damage based on how close you are to Falutius. So everyone that's a melee, especially the tank, needs to make sure to run away. Some strategies don't have any melee DPS on Falutius, but we found we needed it, and I'll explain why in a minute. So make sure your melee run away, including your tank, when you cast Glaciate. If you get about 10 or 15 yards, it's minimum damage. It's really easy. So Ignatius has a few abilities as well, other than that Trail of Fire, which you see there. He will also cast a conal attack on the main tank. So make sure the tank faces him away. It's severe fire damage over about 3 seconds, so the tank will need extra healing when that happens. And then lastly, most importantly, really the crux of this phase is Ignatius's Aegis of Flame ability. He'll cast that, which is a absorption shield that absorbs damage he takes. And more importantly, when he casts that, he also starts channeling Rising Flames, which is a raid-wide fire AE that deals more damage as time goes on. So obviously the idea is to have your DPS switch to Ignatius just before he casts Aegis of Flame and maximize your DPS on him so you can get the Aegis down immediately and then interrupt the Burning Flames before it kills everyone. Or Rising Flames, sorry. So those are the main core mechanics of this phase. But then there's a couple debuffs that are added into the mix. Heart of Ice is randomly cast on a raid member, and that raid member can run next to a melee range of anyone else. And if they do so, they'll give them a buff that increases their damage against Ignatius. So Heart of Ice gives you ice attacks, which hurt Ignatius. Likewise, if you get Burning Blood, then anyone you run next to will get a buff that increases their damage against Falutius. These buffs can cancel each other out though. So if someone with Heart of Ice runs past you, and then someone else runs past you with Burning Blood, the Burning Blood will overwrite the Heart of Ice and vice versa. So because of that, you may want to focus your debuffs based on your DPS needs to get the Aegis of Flame down. The last thing to note is Aegis of Flame, while it's absorbing, it sort of remembers some of the damage that is dealt to it. So the goal of the first phase is to get both of these council members to 25% health about the same time, or lower, because you'll use that health later on. So what we did there is, it's hard to see, but I'll try to explain quickly, is we had all DPS attacking Falutius full time and only attack Ignatius when he gained Aegis of Flame to interrupt the Rising Flames. Otherwise, we run Falutius until he was around 40% or 35%, and then all DPS switched to Ignatius. The reason we did that is then we found that we could stop DPS on Ignatius at around 40%, which was ideal, wait for the next Aegis of Flame to cast, and then burn that Aegis down. And by doing so, he would absorb part of the damage dealt, so he would stop at around 30% health, and then when the shield shattered, it would actually deal some of that absorbed damage to him, dropping him well below 25%, which is good. So, and likewise, we're doing the same thing here in phase 2. So once one of them hits under 25, then you get the next set of council members. So we have Terrestra and what's the other guy's name? I can't remember. The other guy who's on the screen. And so again, your tanks pick them up. A lot of people will split DPS, but again, our strategy we found that worked best was to have all DPS attack Arion and ignore Terrestra. Because similar to Ignatius, Terrestra will gain Hardened Skin, which is an absorption ability. It also increases his damage that he deals. So your tank on Terrestra will need extra healing. But essentially, you can use that absorption to deal extra damage to him, similar to Ignatius. So again, we're getting Arion to around 35%, stopping all damage on him because there's no shield or anything that we have to interrupt on him. And then we'll all switch to Terrestra. So that's the basics of the attacking. The phase itself is not as complicated as phase 1. There are sort of ultimate abilities that each of these guys will use, and they trade off. The first one is always Quake from Terrestra, and it does about 100,000, maybe a little more, enough to pretty much kill most people. And the way you can ignore that damage is by running into a tornado that's floating around the room there. There's always 2 tornadoes and 2 gravity wells. And if you touch a tornado, you'll get a buff that looks like a tornado. And then when Quake is cast, you're basically floating on the ground, above the ground, so you don't get hit by it. And then 60 seconds after Quake is cast, Arion will cast Thundershock, which is his ultimate ability. It definitely does not hurt as much as Quake. So if you need to get hit by Thundershock, that's okay. If you have, high health, you should be able to survive it. But to ignore all Thundershock damage, instead of stepping into the tornado, you step into a gravity well, which are those white sort of sucking things you can see on the ground. And again, you'll gain a debuff that makes you that keeps you grounded to the ground, and you ignore the Thundershock. So this process repeats every 60 seconds. Quake first, so you get a tornado, then Thundershock, so get the gravity, then Quake again, tornado, and so on. Other than that, there's not a whole lot. Arion will blink around, because he's sort of a mage guy. So generally, your DPS will have to run around, and it's kind of hard for melee. And Terrestra will gain Hardened Skin, which is interruptible, but it's a 1-second cast time, and it's very difficult to interrupt with everything that's going on. But if you can interrupt it, it reduces the damage he does to the tank quite a bit. The other thing is Arion will use a Lightning Blast ability on his main tank target every 20 or 30 seconds, and it deals pretty heavy damage. So it's important the tank has a cooldown or just is full health just before that hits. It's like a 4-second cast, so your healers should be able to watch for it. And those are all the basic abilities, I believe. Oh, Lightning Rod, I forgot. So if you see someone with a yellow arrow above them, it's because they have the Lightning Rod debuff. In 10 mana, it casts on one person, so if you look on the right of the screen there, you can see someone with Lightning Rod, and they get marked. And after 10 seconds with that debuff, a strong lightning bolt will be cast on them. If they're too close to anyone else in the raid, it will chain and basically kill people on the second or certainly the third jump. So the general rule is if you get Lightning Rod, just run away from the raid to a wall where no one is standing. The actual first hit of the damage is only around 30,000, so it's easy for anyone to survive by themselves. So that's the basics of it. So again, like our first phase strategy, we had everyone on Arion until he was about 35, and then everyone switched to Terror. And now we waited at 40% for him to get Hardened Skin, which he just did. And then we DPS'd it down, and he absorbed a bunch of the damage. So he went, if you just saw there, he was at 30% health, and then the shield broke because of the absorbed damage, and he went down to about 18, or now 17.8. So that's ideal. So, once one of the second set of council members reaches 25% or lower, the final phase begins, and all 4 council members will combine to form the elemental monstrosity. And this is where the health percentages become important. All of their health levels are added together to form the total health of the monstrosity. So that's why it's key to try to get them all at 25% or lower, so that this monstrosity spawns with as low health as possible. This is really a sort of non-berserk enrage, because as this phase goes on, the damage to the raid increases more and more. So if you can do anything you can to use those shields to push people under 25% in chunks, like sort of I was explaining this in the strategy, then this will help you a lot in this phase. This is a 1 tank phase, so our paladin tank is tanking him, and I'm trying to do cat DPS as best I can. And he starts in the middle of the room always, and he will spawn these ice puddles on the ground. They work sort of like Defile from Lich King, except they grow when he stands in them for a duration rather than players. They only deal around 3,000 damage on average if you have a resistance aura, so they're not that deadly if you have to stand in one as a melee. The other abilities are more deadly. The Lava Seed, as you just saw, he just drops little seeds in random locations around the room. They're very, very tiny, so you can kind of watch where they're going to land and stand between them. But the last ability, which is Electric Instability, is the main, or I shouldn't say last, there's one more, but that's the main damage in this phase. And it's just bolts of lightning cast on random players, and it can chain to people within, I believe it's 10 yards. We never fully confirmed it, but it was definitely under 15. So if you're a ranged player, try to spread out at least 10 yards from other people, and that'll avoid chaining that ability. But as the fight goes on, there's more and more casts, meaning every time he casts it, it just hits more targets base. So that plus chaining just turns it into a nightmare. And eventually it becomes unhealable. So it's really a burning him down phase. The other thing you may have seen is Gravity Crush, which is cast on a random player. It seems to prefer melee though. And they will take about 72% of their health in damage over 6 seconds and then be dropped for another bit of damage from falling. So make sure healers watch that player and heal them up. But this phase was really the hardest for us. We had many 2 and 3% wipes until we finally perfected our first phase strategy to get his health slightly lower. And then it's just about spreading out. You can see we start from the middle and the tank pulls him around the edge. And this allows the ranged and healers to sort of always be in range and never have to move. So that helped us a little bit with DPS. Other than that, you need just massive cooldowns. Anything you can do. We actually had to use 2 healers on this rather than 3 because we just couldn't get the DPS otherwise. So again, don't be afraid to try this phase a lot, and if you can perfect your phase 1 strategies to get this guy as close to 25% as possible when he spawns, then you should be in a good position to get him down. And I think that was everything. I know that was a lot to explain, and this video is really slow, so I apologize for that, but I think that covers all the basics, and as you can see, we still barely got this kill. This was our first kill. Anyway, that's all there is to it. So that's the Twilight Council. Good luck, and thanks for watching.